On behalf of the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, California, David Brock and I would like to welcome Mr. Narayana Murthy. My name is Uday Kapoor and I'm a volunteer in the Oral Histories program, and David is the director of the Center for Software Histories at the museum. Mr. Murthy is an Indian information technology industrialist and the co-founder of Infosys, one of the largest multinational corporations providing business consulting, technology, engineering, and outsourcing services. Mr. Murthy received his Bachelor's of Engineering in Electrical Engineering from the University of Mysore in 1967 and an MS in Electrical Engineering from IIT Kanpur in 1969. Mr. Murthy has been listed among the 12 greatest entrepreneurs of our time by Fortune magazine and has been described as the father of the Indian IT sector by Time magazine. Mr. Murthy conceptualized, articulated, and implemented the global delivery model, which has become the backbone of the Indian software industry. Among his numerous awards, he has received the Padma Vibhushan, Commander of the Order of the British Empire, Legion of Honor from France, the Ernst Weber Medal, the Hoover Medal, the Thomas Jefferson Medal, the Global Humanitarian Award, and most recently the Founders Medal from IEEE. He serves on numerous boards across the globe. Mr. Murthy, along with his wife Sudha Murthy, established the Infosys Foundation in 1996 to address the needs of the poorest of the poor and to support higher education and research. Welcome, Mr. Murthy.
Thank you very much, Uday. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Your full name is Nagavara Ramarao Narayan Murthy,
Yes.
sometimes fondly mentioned as NRN.
That's right.
You were born on August 20th, 1946 in Mysore city in India.
Yeah.
So at this stage, we would like to start from your early life. And David can jump in whenever he would like to. You were born into a Brahmin family.
Yeah.
Could you give us a sense of what this meant for your experience of the Indian society in the 1945?
Well, my father was a school teacher. He taught English, physics, and mathematics in high school. We were 8 children. My grandmother was there. So we were 11 people in the family. Being a school teacher, obviously we came from a lower middle class family. But there was a lot of happiness, a lot of joy, a lot of camaraderie, a lot of banter among the siblings, sometimes fights. But one sibling took care of the other sibling, etc. Because mother would always be very, very busy in the kitchen cooking on a wood stove. So therefore, we learned to be self-sufficient. We learned to take care of each other. There was a lot of sharing. There was a lot of caring. That's what I would say.
David, Joe.
Could you describe for us the community in which your family lived? Was it an intensely urban environment, or were you on the outskirts of the city? Or if you could paint us a picture of what it was like for you.
Well, my father used to get transferred from one small town to another small town. And most often we lived in the center of the town. It was quite urban. And the school used to be very near where we lived, walking distance. And there would be a main street, and and these were very small towns, not big at all. And everybody knew everybody else, and then children played in the evenings. My father was a great believer in a healthy mind resides in a healthy body. Therefore, he insisted that we all spend a little bit of our time playing. Of course, those days, football, soccer and cricket were very popular in India. So
Correct. So those were also the days of Indian independence, and there was a lot of turmoil. Of course, you were relatively young at that
Yeah.
time, but do you recall any events or any happenings?
no, I think the earliest years that I remember are after 1950, when I was about 5 years or so. We would all sit down together for dinner with father. Food would be served on the floor. We would all be sitting on the floor, and mother would serve food for all of us. And then the father would talk about all the wonderful things that are happening in India. Because Jawaharlal Nehru had a great vision of building modern India. He would talk about, my father would talk about how Nehru was building, steel plants. He was building huge dams. He was building atomic energy establishment. He was building educational institutions of higher learning, etc., etc. In other words, every day there would be some discussion on the wonderful things that were happening in India at that point of time in preparing India to be a part of the modern world.
Right. David? Yeah.
How did you react to your father's discussions about this? Was it something that, as a young person, made you feel excited and optimistic and something that you wanted to be a part of? Or how did you feel about that?
Well, we were all very excited because father and mother and even my grandmother would often talk about all the sacrifices that Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, and other leaders of the country had made in obtaining independence for India. And father would talk about all the great vision that Nehru had and the need for India to become integrated with the modern world. And therefore, we were all very, very excited about hearing the next bit of good news from the father, because those days we were not getting newspaper into our home. We didn't even have a radio at that point of time. So therefore, father would read newspaper outside, and he would come and tell us all the wonderful things that were happening. So we were very upbeat. We were very positive about India. We are very, very excited. Yeah.
Wonderful. In terms of your personal interest in reading and interest in your future, were there any topics that excited you? Were you reading any books that impacted you?
Well, father was a great believer that we should all learn English. Well, therefore, every Sunday he would read classical books like books of Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, and other well-known writers of English. And he would have a dictionary by our side, and he would ask us to look up the dictionary and find out the meaning. So in other words, it was a lot of learning exercise for us. And we read these wonderful authors, and it was in some sense a window to us to the outside world. So yeah.
And how was your experience in the school? Were there any teachers that you remember were good mentors, for example?
Well, we had excellent teachers who taught us very, very good values, teachers who are very strict, teachers who were pretty good in what they were teaching, and teachers who walked the talk. So therefore, we were highly inspired by these teachers, absolutely.
I was reading in an interview with you. You talked about education being kind of a major part of your household, which I think we just touched on, but also respect.
Yeah.
And I was really curious to hear, what did that really mean? What were the lessons in respect, and how was that manifest in your household?
Well, first of all, in our tradition, respecting people who are older than you was very, very important. When we meant respect, that is, first of all, listening to what they say very attentively, trying to internalize those advice, then perhaps thinking about it ourselves, not questioning. Somehow questioning was not very much encouraged in India of those years. Introspecting on it, and then saying, what did this person mean by this particular advice? How will it benefit me? What is it that we need to do? Those were the kinds of things that manifested as respect. Respect also meant, if there's only one chair, if I was sitting, if an elder came, we would stand up and give the chair to that person. These were some of the dimensions of respect that we as children were encouraged to follow.
When did you start thinking about your career, and what kind of career, especially engineering, do you remember?
Well, those days, India was on to lots of engineering projects. There were steel plants being constructed, there were power plants being constructed, there were dams being constructed. So we knew that there was going to be a big opportunity if we became either an engineer or a doctor. However, a job as a civil servant in the government was also very, very attractive. But my father felt that becoming a skill-based person like an engineer or a doctor would be much more appropriate if we want to succeed in the India of the 70s and 80s. And therefore, he advised us to to take up one of the professions. And that's how I became an electrical engineer.
Interesting.
I was particularly interested in what I understood was your particular ambition to be an electrical engineer associated with hydroelectric power production.
Yeah.
And it's my sense, and please let me know if I'm right or wrong, but that these large hydroelectric power stations also had a kind of resonance as projects of national pride, that these were big projects, socially, politically.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Okay. First of all, they resonated with the idea of a resurgent India, of a modern India. These were huge, there would be a huge dam and lots of water falling, and then electricity was getting generated, and that electricity was being used to run pumps which provided water to fields and to cities for people to drink. In other words, there was a sense of being part of building modern India. And second, for me, most of these hydroelectric power stations were in green valleys, were very pristine and serene environments. So therefore, they had a big attraction in terms of the job opportunities that gave me. So both in terms of these projects being of national value, and also they're providing me an opportunity to lead a very comfortable life in a serene environment. Both these were very attractive.
So your interest I'm sure at that time you heard about the IITs. They were pretty prestigious institutions. And so you had an interest in joining one of the IITs, and you passed the exam, in fact. But I understand that there were some financial difficulties in terms of being able to attend the IITs in the family.
Well, those days I used to get what is called national scholarship. If you were in the top 4 in a state in your high school examination in the state, then you were eligible for a national scholarship. But the money would be dispersed at the end of the year. That was the way it worked. So when I went to my father and told him, he said, look, there is no way I can support you because by putting you up in a hostel outside the hometown of Mysore where we all lived, he said that would require probably 1/3 of his salary. So he said, I have 8 children. So therefore, I don't think I can do that. And he also said, look, if you are smart, if you work hard, it doesn't matter where you study, you will do well in your future. That's how I didn't go. But I don't regret it. I think,
He was so right. So how was University of Mysore looking back? Was that part of your education very satisfying to you?
It was very satisfactory because, once again, the teachers that we had those days were quite knowledgeable. There was no research component in the college where I studied.
Actually, even in IITs, there was not
hardly
that much research.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. It's more like a liberal arts college here, where the focus was on good education. So we had very good teachers in all branches of engineering, civil, electrical, and mechanical. There were good teachers in physics, in mathematics, etc. It was a wonderful period of 5 years that I spent at the University of Mysore. Yeah,
that's very nice. And so you chose electrical engineering as your topic. And were there any particular experiences or teachers that impacted you as to what field of electrical engineering you wanted to go into?
Well, first of all, I was reasonably good in mathematics. And my teacher said, look, if you are reasonably good in mathematics, probably electrical engineering, electronics engineering would be a good area to pursue, because most of what you study would be based on mathematics. And it was also a field that did not require me to do a lot of physical work. So therefore, I chose electrical engineering.
So would it be fair to say that, as you mentioned mathematics, you were partial to mathematics, that your interest in control theory developed towards the end?
Oh yeah, I think my father was interested in mathematics. Even my children are interested in mathematics. So at home, there has always been considerable reverence and respect for mathematics. So it started from my grandfather, perhaps, and therefore it was very, very easy for us to do reasonably well in mathematics and to choose a discipline of engineering that used a lot of mathematics.
Right, right. It was my experience because I enjoyed mathematics
Yeah,
as well, and
of course.
I chose control theory.
Yeah,
Even
exactly.
coming to this country, I
Yeah.
continued in that, and
Yeah.
then I had to change my field for different reasons, but thank you.
How large was the university during your years there in terms of the student population?
Well, the engineering discipline had about 200 students every year. It was a 5-year course, so there were 1,000 students. But my own branch of electrical engineering had about 40 students each year. So in other words, you are looking at only about 200 students. Not too many, yeah.
Then I think you moved to Indian Institute of Technology in Kanpur.
Yeah.
How did that come about? I understand that you had spoken to some professor who guided you into computer engineering.
Well, what happened was I wanted to go to IIT Kanpur because I had heard a lot about it, that it was a good institute. It was supported by 8 American universities. It had a very large computer, IBM 7044 and IBM 1401. And that it had the American system of education where you could take courses from any department that you wanted as long as you satisfied the core requirements. So because of this flexibility, I wanted to go to IIT Kanpur. And in fact, the first year, I took lots of courses in control theory. I did modern control theory, optimal controls, calculus of variations, etc., etc. Basically mathematics,
Yes.
as you very well
Yes.
know. But then one day I listened to an American professor who was on sabbatical from Princeton at IIT Kanpur talk about the future of the world and the computers. It was a fascinating talk that he gave. It was just a breakfast table talk. And I requested him to suggest to me a few papers that I could go to the Central Library and read. And I went to the Central Library after breakfast. I read those papers. And Monday morning, I went to my advisor and said, look, I have decided to change my field from control theory to computer science. He was a wonderful human being, very generous. So he asked me a couple of questions to ascertain that I had thought about it a little bit. And once he was certain that I had thought about it, he said, my best wishes, and whatever you do, do it well with seriousness. So that's how I changed.
So your first experience with computers was at IIT?
Well, my first experience with computers was at IIT Kanpur. We had a 7044, we had a 1620, we had a 1401. They were all IBM machines. The first time I saw what I thought was a computer was an IBM 407 printing machine, printer really. It was taking cards on one side and then printing out. So I thought it was a computer. My friends fooled me. And then in the hostel that evening, they all made fun of me. And but then I would say, over a period of a few months, I became pretty good in using 7044 because some of us had to use the entire computer in the night to run some simulation programs using what's called GPS, General Purpose System Simulator. It was a language that helped us to do simulation. And that required us to mount 6 tapes on the 6 tape units. That was a macho thing. So to make those 6 tape units, whir, that was a big deal. So we had a wonderful time.
Had the computer been in your imagination at all before this discussion with the visiting professor? Had it been like in your consciousness or imagination up to that time?
Well, when I was a student in the undergraduate course, I had heard that IIT Kanpur was the only institute of higher learning in India which had a computer, a digital computer. Many institutions had analog computers, but this was the only one that had a digital computer. So therefore, I wanted to go to IIT Kanpur. And in the first semester, because I liked mathematics so much and I liked control theory so much, somehow I was still focused on my control theory. But when I listened to this professor from Princeton give a stunning discourse on how computers would impact the world, that was a transformational moment for me. That is what made me go to the library, read the papers, and then decide to change my field.
So you were learning programming. Were you into software at that time? Were you was that or more like computer architecture, the hardware design?
Well, we had courses on computer architecture. We had a course on operating systems. We had a course on compilers. We had a course on automata theory. We had a course on switching theory. We had a course on, it was a very early course on algorithms, not as developed as today, but still it was a course on algorithms. And it was very exciting.
So following your college in IIT, what was your inclination? Were you looking at working in the industry, and what kind of job were you looking for?
Every one of my batchmates, there were only 12 students who were doing the graduate course in computer science. Every one of us had about 4 or 5 jobs in companies that had installed a very old computer called IBM 1401 computer, which is there in this museum. And as I was about to decide on which job to take, one day I got a call from my professor, Professor Rajaraman, and he said, look, here is this professor from the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He has come for recruitment, and I believe he is going to install the first time-sharing system in the country. So why don't you go and talk to him? I went and spoke to Professor Krishnas from IIM Ahmedabad, and he gave another stunning expose on how this time-sharing system would be a leapfrog for me in terms of my knowledge of computer science, my knowledge of what can be done, etc., etc. But the only negative was the salary was half the salary of other jobs that I had gotten. So I went back to my professor and told him this is the only thing. He said, at this age, if I were you, I would take the job at the IIM Ahmedabad, because you're going to be working or you're going to be using a time-sharing system. You will have opportunity to study how a time-sharing system works, the various components of the time-sharing system. You will also have opportunity to develop interpreters, simulators, etc., because at that time, ECIL, the Electronics Corporation of India Limited, was manufacturing computers in India. He said they need a lot of software, you will be able to do that. So I listened to my professor, and then I spoke to my father, and my father said, I don't know anything, you speak to your teacher, and if whatever your teacher says, do it. And so I did exactly that. And that's the best decision I made in life, so.
Very nice. Yes, so Professor Krishna,
Yeah.
of course, I had heard about him from when I talked to Dr. Kalat,
Yeah,
Professor Kalat, because he knew his dad.
Yeah, they were classmates.
Yeah, and so his decision to come to this country was also influenced by
Yes,
him.
yes.
So this is a fascinating linkage.
Before we move to your new position, I was curious about just those years when you were pursuing your graduate studies, which I think were 1967 to 1969.
Yeah.
Those are very eventful years in world history, and I just wondered how those sort of the cultural and political developments going on elsewhere in the world were evident or not in your experience, what you were making of the news, what your thinking was like.
I as far as the students at IIT Kanpur were concerned, we were heavily influenced by all the wonderful advances that were taking place in the US. Because MIT, Princeton, University of Pennsylvania, University of Michigan, University of Berkeley, and like that, 8 of the very famous universities in this country were associated with IIT Kanpur. And because there were a few professors from each of these institutes, each of these universities, present at IIT Kanpur in India, we had we were very excited about learning new things from these professors, interacting with them to understand the other culture, the American culture. In other words, we were all very, very positive about what was happening in this country. That was the time of, in some sense, the '68 Berkeley Revolution, and John F. Kennedy had died in 1963, November, 22nd November, if I'm not wrong. And then President Johnson was there, and then I suppose Nixon had just started in '68. But the reality was simply this, that we were identifying with all the wonderful things that were happening in this country in terms of the Berkeley Revolution, the student revolution in Paris, etc., etc. So they were wonderful days.
And were the kind of engagement with politics, I guess, that really happened with your father's discussion to you and your siblings? Did you still feel, what was your politics like in those years?
Well, I must admit that we were all left of center for 2 important reasons. One, Soviet Union was closer to India at the government-to-government level. When India requested United States for help in building a steel plant, the U.S. senators and the members of Congress, they refused, saying that no, then there won't be any opportunity for our steel companies, etc. So, if I'm not wrong, Soviet Union ended up building 2 steel plants for India. So therefore, in some way, there was that feeling that U.S. Soviet Union is our friend at the government level. But at a person-to-person level, at a people-to-people level, U.S. was clearly the friend, because there are so many wonderful professors from all these 8 universities, and it was clear that U.S. was the technology leader, all of that. So there were 2 levels. At a person-to-person level, our interaction with the U.S., our appreciation for the U.S. was the highest. But at a government-to-government level, it was with the Soviet Union. Second, you see, because I belong to a generation that had seen leaders who had gotten independence for India, there was this whole feeling of nationalism. There was this whole feeling of we must be self-reliant, we must develop, and the whole feeling of anti-imperialism, etc., etc. To that extent, we were left of center. So there were 2 aspects of our personality in that sense.
Right, and at that time, what I remember also, the conflict with Pakistan, and that influenced life on campus as well. And for me, at least, on IIT, I remember the war.
Yes.
And the blackouts and so on.
Yes, absolutely. But the only thing is that happened after I left IIT Kanpur. But during the time of IIT Kanpur, it was really one of this not building the steel plant, Soviet Union helping us the second time, and then the fact that the leaders of independence were all right in front of us. So I think those were the 2 factors that influenced us a little bit.
So going back to Professor Krishnaya, what I remember is that he had a lot of connections abroad. He had worked overseas, and understand that he recommended CESA in France to you. Would you elaborate on that?
Well, what happened was he and I had produced a paper on deadlock resolution, which we presented in a conference in Italy, and the chairman of that session was the director of a company called CESA in Paris, and my paper was liked very much. And then my Professor Krishna was very kind to say that it was his student who had done it, and that's how he recommended me for a job. But at that time, I had got a scholarship to go and do my PhD in computer science from Technion, Israel. And for me, Israel was, Technion was the most attractive option to go and do my PhD. But when all my friends said, look, you are in the city is Paris, the job is to design an operating system, I just said, okay,
I was wondering about your, with your experience of timeshare computing, and if you could just talk a little bit about, I think that was Hewlett-Packard equipment that you were using. If you could talk about just your experience with that and what you learned.
Yeah. Well, when I joined Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, I was the chief system programmer. I was the head of the computer center. I had the opportunity to install this time sharing system. It was based on HP 2116B computer. It had 16 teletypewriters. It ran BASIC. And we had gotten the source code of the time sharing system. So we learned a lot about how the scheduler works, how interrupt drivers work, how we could modify the operating system to suit our needs, etc., etc. In addition, we also built a simulator for one of the Indian computers, TDC 312, on top of the HP 2116, on top of the operating system that ran on HP 2116B, and we developed a basic interpreter. I developed a basic interpreter running on the simulator, and that was a wonderful thing, a wonderful experience. Second observation I have is, frankly, I haven't seen another piece of software that was as infallible as the software that HP had produced for time sharing on that HP 2116B. It did not have a single bug. I mean, it's something, even today when youngsters come to me and talk about this bug, that bug, I tell them that, look, HP produced this unbelievable time sharing software in 1968. I said, why can't you guys do that? Because they did it in 1968. So I must say that that showed me how one should write a piece of large software. That was, HP was a remarkable company.
May I ask just one more quick question
Please.
about that basic interpreter that you made
Yeah.
for the simulator? Was that an Indian produced mini computer, or I can't?
Yeah, it
recall
was an Indian, TDC 312 and was an Indian produced mini computer. It was a 12-bit mini computer, yeah.
Thank you.
It was modeled after PDP-8, yeah.
What was your experience like in France, in Paris, with CESA? Did you speak French?
Well, when I went to France, I didn't know a word of French, but I decided to attend Alliance Française every day after my work, and I learned French within the first 6 months. It required a little bit of hard work, but I managed. Paris was a wonderful city. The student revolution of '68 had taken place. Once you speak a little bit of French, the French people are very, very kind, very kind. I mean, I even today, I visit that city at least twice a year, and I enjoy every minute of my stay. There was, the city never slept, and I would walk. I would walk from one end of the city to the other end of the city at 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock. It was absolutely safe. It was a wonderful thing. And then in the office, there was a lot of learning, overall. And most importantly, for somebody who was a left of center person, I learned several important lessons. That one, that the only way a society can solve the problem of poverty is through creation of jobs. It is not the responsibility of the government to create these jobs, but it is the responsibility of the government to create an environment where more and more entrepreneurs can create better and better jobs in larger and larger numbers. That was the biggest lesson I learned in France. And that's when my leftism started to become weaker and weaker and weaker. So.
And then you had the experience in
Yeah.
Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Maybe you can mention briefly.
Well, when I decided to go back to my country at the end of the project, I wanted to hitchhike because I said, look, I'm pretty young, and if I don't take that kind of risk and have some fun now, I would never do that. So I hitchhiked my way from Paris to Kabul, I took a flight from Kabul to Amritsar. And I went to a lot of cities, a lot of countries, in both Western Europe and Eastern Europe. But I went to a place called Niš, which is a border town between what's then Yugoslavia and now Serbia, and Bulgaria. That's a border town between those two countries. It was 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday night, and I went to the restaurant in the railway station, and I asked for food. They said, "We will give you food only if you have the Yugoslavian dinars." But I did not have the Yugoslavian money, so I lay down on the platform. And next morning, I went into the town. In a communist country, why would any bank be open on a Sunday? And those days, there were no ATMs, no credit cards, nothing. So I came back and I again lay down on the platform because I wanted to conserve my energy. At 8:30, Sofia Express came, and I got onto the platform. There was a girl and a boy sitting opposite me. I tried to strike a conversation with them. I first tried my Russian. I knew Russian at that time, but neither of them wanted to speak to me in Russian because they probably hated Russia. Then I tried my English. They didn't understand English. Finally, I tried my French, and the girl understood French. She was talking to me. The boy got upset with us for some reason. He brought the police, and the police took the girl away, and they ransacked my backpack and sleeping bag. They dragged me out of the train, and they locked me up in a small 8-foot by 8-foot room in the railway station. It had a cold floor, and there was just a hole in the corner for toilet, and there was just a tap. So I was there for about 120 hours without food or water. And then they opened the door at 1 a.m. on Wednesday night. I was locked up on Sunday night. On Wednesday night, they opened the door. They dragged me on the platform, put me in the guard's compartment of a departing freight train, and then they said something that totally transformed my life. They said, "You are from a friendly country called India, therefore we are letting you go." So then I said, if this society treats friends like this, I don't want to be part of such a society. That's what transformed me from a confused leftist to a determined, compassionate capitalist. So I said, I'll go back to my country. I'll conduct an experiment in entrepreneurship. So that's how I was totally transformed.
I think that term, compassionate capitalist, I first heard that when I read about Jamshedji Tata.
Yeah.
He was the first compassionate capitalist in the country.
Well, to me, compassionate capitalism is about capitalism in mind and socialism at heart. In any society, if you want peace, stability, and harmony, then the rich, the powerful, and the elite will have to show self-restraint. Self-restraint in allocating for themselves more power, more fruit, more part of the fruit of their labor, right? So therefore, only a society where the rich and the powerful demonstrate that self-restraint is a society where capitalism will flourish. Otherwise, capitalism has the danger of becoming unpopular amongst the poorer sections of the society.
Right. If there's a divide with the upper management with high salaries and people with very low salaries, that's like a big divide.
Absolutely.
Would it be fair to say that at this stage you were looking at capitalism as a tool to accomplish an end rather than an end in and of itself? You know, that's what it sounds like to me listening to you.
No, you are right. For me, capitalism was a tool towards abolition of poverty in a country like India, because capitalism is what encourages entrepreneurship best. And as I said earlier, entrepreneurs convert the power of an idea into wealth for themselves and jobs for others. And therefore, if we want more and more jobs to be created, then we need to embrace entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship flourishes best under capitalism. Therefore, capitalism is a very important instrument. Yeah.
Yes. But also, if there are shackles, like the time in India before 1991, even with the best intentions, one can only have moderate results, as I was talking to some other folks. So let's go back to your travel to Pune after you came back from France. Can you maybe tell us about that?
Well, after I returned from France, my Professor Krishna, had started a think tank in Pune called Systems Research Institute. Systems Research Institute was in some sense modeled after Stanford Research Institute. It used operations research, systems theory, and mathematical modeling to address the problems of large-scale public systems. And I was very excited by it, and therefore I went to Pune, and I was quite happy doing that.
So at this time you also met your future wife,
Yeah.
Sudha Murthy. Maybe you can say a few words about that experience.
Well, I met my wife Sudha through a friend of mine who was working with her at Telco, which is an automobile manufacturing company in Pune. She was an engineer. She was a graduate engineer who specialized in computer science, and she was working at Telco, and that's how we got introduced. And I was very lucky to get to know her.
She's a remarkable lady. I have
Thank
met
you.
her, as I had mentioned to you. So thank you very much.
Well, could you describe your work your initial work at the institute when you got back? What kind of had they established a computer operation, or?
No, at the think tank, we had not yet installed any computer. What we were using the computer at the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai. But the kind of problems that we looked at were, for example, we compared the drilling performance of oil and natural gas commission with a company in the private sector called Oil India. So we then looked at why one company was doing better than the other in certain parameters, why it was not doing as well in certain other parameters. And then we wrote up a report to the government saying in what way they can make the public sector drilling company to become more efficient. That was the idea.
So you created a company called Softronix in 1975, 76 time frame. Could you say a few words about that?
Well, my desire to become an entrepreneur was still burning, and therefore, the earliest opportunity I wanted to get back to entrepreneurship, and so I left Systems Research Institute, and I created a company called Softronix, which was all about developing application software for Indian corporations. But then that company was a little bit too advanced for the time in India, because there were hardly any computers in the country. That was the time when IBM and Coca-Cola had walked out of India because of a certain restriction that the government had placed, and therefore even the old outdated computers like the IBM 1401, which IBM was manufacturing in India, was no more available. ICL 1901, which was another outdated computer, they also left India. So the only computer manufacturing company that was present in the country was ECIL, Electronics Corporation of India Limited. But they were not producing enough computers. So therefore, within a matter of 8 to 9 months, I realized that that there was a structural problem there in the market, and therefore I closed down Softronix and decided to get experience and enter the export market later. That's how I learned an important lesson and closed Softronix within about 8-9 months.
Was your idea for the firm that you would work with a group of employees to develop the software, or was the idea that the company would be a structure where you could bring people in sort of like on a more contractual basis to work on projects? Or
no, those days the only model that worked in India was if those employees were full-time employees.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So the next phase of your life, I think you were with Putney Computers.
Yeah.
Can you explain what happened, how you left?
Well, I was invited by the Putneys to become the general manager of software. They had decided to represent data general computers in India. They had also started a business to develop software for export to the United States. So it was a great opportunity for me to learn this new business. I would also have the opportunity of working with bright youngsters. So I developed a group of about 100 youngsters at PCS. We also sold data general computers in India. We also developed application software on data general computers for our clients in India. So in other words, there were three aspects of our business: selling the data general computers, exporting software on data general computers, and finally developing application software for local customers. So I was there for about 4 years before I started Infosys.
Okay. So by now, your emphasis was really on software,
Yeah.
Software and application software. Okay.
My impression was that both that for the application software for this firm, textile and textile-related companies seem to be the customer base. Is both for the export market and the domestic market. Is that correct?
You're right insofar as the export market was concerned, because there was a company in New York which had developed an application package called Comprehensive Apparel Manufacturers Package, which was primarily aimed at companies in the US that were producing or importing clothing as well as shoes from the Far East and selling it in the US. For example, Reebok, Tropical Garments, Capital Mercury Corporation, or and Jockey, etc., etc. And we were in charge of upgrading that package to run on a much larger computer, a super mini computer like Data General MV8000. We upgraded the package onto DG MV8000 first, and then we rehosted it on with additional functionality on an IBM 4341. So our specialty was in software development, and our customers' specialty was selling their package.
So we're starting to talk about Infosys and how it got started and how you work with these other gentlemen that joined you. How did you select them, or how did you start the computer system, Infosys?
Well, I had this urge to become an entrepreneur, and I tried once. It didn't take off. But then after spending 4 years at PCS, I realized that I had to start pretty quickly because I was reaching my 35th year. I had this somehow this belief that if I did not become an entrepreneur before my 35th year, then I will not succeed. So I had I was born on 20th August 1946, and so therefore the company was founded on 7th July 1981. So just a month and a few days before my 35th year, or 35th birthday. And there were 6 bright youngsters who were working with me at PCS. And when I told them that I am going to branch off on my own, they said, no, we would leave and we want to work with you, because they had enjoyed working with me. I had enjoyed working with them. And we had lots of hopes, lots of dreams, some confidence, but no money. But it all worked out well because we worked out a deal with our client where they gave us a reasonably good advance. So we managed that, and that's how Infosys took off.
Yeah, it's almost legendary how everybody talks about meeting in your bedroom and talking about the vision and the values of the company.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe you could, let's hear it in your words.
Well, I modeled Infosys on the same lines as Abraham Lincoln defined U.S. democracy in his Gettysburg Address. I said, I want Infosys to be the first Indian company of the professional, for the professional, and by the professional. There was no such company in India at that time. So my younger colleagues were also highly thrilled with that definition, and they were very happy. We conducted ourselves like that. Everything was highly professional. We adhered to the highest level of transparency, the highest level of fairness, accountability. We followed the finest principles of corporate governance. Right from the day we were a small startup to till 2014 when I left. So this was,
I'm sure your wife was very supportive, and by now you had family, you have children at that time. So.
Oh yeah.
So how would she react to your going into a startup like?
Well, my wife has always been very supportive. Without her support, I don't think I could have done even a small fraction of whatever Infosys has achieved. She provided all the help she could, and in fact, she gave the initial amount of $250, equivalent 10,000 rupees, because some of my colleagues did not even have that small amount of money to contribute towards equity. And she worked hard. She had a job. She supported me. And I think she's quite happy now.